Steel blades cut through gleaming ice, carrying athletes into a battle of contrasting skills. Strategy and instinct.
What a save!
Teamwork and independence. Elegance and brute strength.
What a shot!
Those carved from grit and skill are forever honored at a special place in Toronto, Canada. Here at the Hockey Hall of Fame, we celebrate the game's evolution and enduring heroes. Stories of their achievement define hockey's rich history and show that in the fiercest of battles, there is no triumph without excellence.
The Canadians win the Stanley Cup!
The Stanley Cup, hockey's ultimate prize. Hi, I'm Jeremy Roenick of the Philadelphia Flyers. It's the quest for the holy grail of hockey that binds all of us as players. But there are many things both on and off the ice which set apart the more than 200 men honored in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Physical attributes like speed and strength, emotional traits like guts and will. Within those halls are the innovators and revolutionaries, all distinguished in their own unique way. Hockey can be a grueling sport, and the rigors of the game put a premium on strength. Hockey great Gordie Howe was as strong as they come, continuing to play into his 50s, becoming a Hall of Famer in 1972. But strength isn't only measured by physical brawn. It can also be gauged through mental toughness. At 6'4", 225 pounds, trust me, Mario Lemieux cuts an imposing figure on the ice. But it's his strong will that usually leads and dominates the action.
Mario Lemieux arrived on the hockey scene in 1984. Selected by the Pittsburgh Penguins as the first choice in the NHL draft, Lemieux brought with him a unique combination of size, strength, and finesse, traits that would carry number 66 all the way to the Hockey Hall of Fame.
You just knew that something big was going to happen with this guy when he ended up scoring his first NHL goal on his first NHL shift, on his first NHL shot.
There is Mario Lemieux, and he is off, racing it all alone. Lemieux, his first shot on goal, and he scores!
I was privileged to be in attendance at the old Boston Garden, and Mario jumped over the boards, picked up the puck, went down and put one past Pete Peters, who later said that he could not believe the sight of this guy with these long arms. He was the first goalie to be victimized of many.
Lemieux dances and it scores! Recchi in again. Lemieux scores! Lemieux, oh my gosh! You'll not see a prettier goal ever!
While it's likely Lemieux could have simply bullied his way to greatness, his refined skills brought him to an even higher level and created a new brand of havoc around the NHL.
Mario Lemieux could see the ice far better than anybody else. His passes were better, his knowledge was better, his skating was better.
He had just a long stride, and he didn't look like he was moving, but he was flying.
Finds Lemieux on the left wing. Lemieux fires a shot, scored! Oh, what a goal!
Through 6 seasons of personal success in the 1980s, Lemieux used his rare combination of force and finesse to become one of the top stars in the National Hockey League. He was the Rookie of the Year in 1984 and the league's most valuable player in 1988. He won 3 scoring titles and 3 All-Star Game MVPs, but no Stanley Cup. In 1991, the Penguins finally reached the Stanley Cup Finals against the Minnesota North Stars. Evenly matched over the first few games, Minnesota threw its best at Pittsburgh. But Mario put the Penguins on his back and kept them in the series.
Up the ice comes Lemieux, one-on-one with Casey. Game is tied.
After the team split the first 4 games, Pittsburgh took the series lead in Game 5 with a 6-4 victory, inching closer to the Stanley Cup. The final game was a rout, 8-0 Pittsburgh. The Penguins had won their first Stanley Cup, thanks to Lemieux's 16-goal, 28-assist MVP playoff performance.
The Pittsburgh Penguins, the
And they weren't through. The following year, again carried by the strong will of mighty Mario, the Pens repeated as champions.
When you win Stanley Cups back-to-back like they did, then you're at the top. Then the fans respect you and respect the organization.
The Penguins were now the strongest franchise in hockey, and Mario the game's strongest player. But in January of 1993, that strength would be tested to its outer limit when Lemieux and the Penguins made a stunning announcement.
As you all know, Mario Lemieux was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease. A CT scan on January 6th revealed an enlarged mass in his neck.
Ahead for Lemieux would be the toughest fight of his life, the fight for his life. Mario Lemieux had entered the NHL in 1984, and 9 years later had used his strength and determination to set scoring records, garner awards, and win 2 Stanley Cup championships. But after being diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease in 1993, his legendary will would have to serve him in a different battle against a far more dangerous opponent.
Every time you hear the word cancer, it's a scary thing. You know, I went back home after I saw Dr. Burke and Dr. Jones and gave me the news, and you know, on the way down to my house, could hardly drive because of the tears and crying the whole day, and that was certainly a tough day in my life.
The only thing he knew about Hodgkin's disease at that time was that he had a cousin who had died from it. So a lot of bad things had raced through his mind. He was engaged to be married, and it kind of throws your world into chaos. He was going to push forward. He was going to give it a great fight. He had a lot of confidence in his doctors.
It has been recommended that he undergo 4 weeks of radiation treatment.
He said to me, "I just want to have my life back. I want to be playing again. I want to be Mario Lemieux, the hockey player. I don't want to be Mario Lemieux, the cancer patient."
In February of 1993, Mario Lemieux began 4 weeks of intense radiation therapy that would have sapped the strength of most men. Throughout, Lemieux exhibited nearly superhuman physical and mental toughness, and remarkably, a month later, he was ready to return to the ice.
There was a plane waiting for him after he got off the radiation table, get in a plane, fly to Philadelphia.
Got in uniform, made the warm-up. And when he came out for the warm-up, in Philadelphia, you're either a flyer or you're the enemy. They know when somebody's put his heart and his courage out on the line.
There is the hand for Mario Lemieux. Lemieux missed 23 games.
Well, whether they were standing already or not, this is a standing ovation for Mario Lemieux here at the Spectrum. It's nice to see.
But the warm feelings surrounding Lemieux's triumphant return would eventually fade away. Bothered by back problems and ultimately fatigued by the challenge of overcoming his illness, Mario retired in 1997 at the age of 31. Recognizing both his unique talent and his indomitable will, the Hockey Hall of Fame's 18-member selection committee, comprised of former players, ex-coaches, executives, and sports writers, waived its customary 3-year waiting period after a player retires and immediately enshrined Lemieux.
When he retired, he had the talent, the ability to become an honored member. What he wants to do after that is up to him.
What Lemieux did after that was nearly as amazing as his career. After Mario's retirement, the Penguins fared poorly on the ice, and even worse financially. So Lemieux did what came naturally to him. He bought the team in 1999, laced up his skates in 2000, put the Penguins on his broad back, and single-handedly brought hockey back to Pittsburgh.
A lot of people have played the game after becoming a Hall of Famer, but Mario, I think, was looking to change the game a little bit, and I think he did.
Throughout his Hall of Fame career, Mario Lemieux proved that strength goes far beyond physical. Always able to reach down deep inside, Lemieux thrilled fans night after night, personified the best in sport, and gave us insight into the heart of a champion.
As Lemieux showed, inner strength and will is just as important as raw talent in making it into the Hall of Fame. and so was intensity. Take Bobby Clark in the 1970s. He was a diabetic and didn't weigh more than 150 pounds sopping wet. But he never backed down on the ice, and by 1987 was a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame. No Hall of Famer was as intense as Maurice Richard, the Rocket, as he was known in the 1940s and 50s. Often played like a man possessed, but that intensity took Richard from the cold ice and landed him in hot water.
Maurice the Rocket Richard, a native son of Montreal, put on the number 9 of the Montreal Canadiens for the first time in 1942. He had blazing speed and was soon nicknamed the Rocket. But what set this Hall of Famer apart from his contemporaries was his unmatched intensity. The Rocket was fire on ice.
He'd get to that blue line and he'd start cutting for the net. You know, there was no skating around you or anything like that. I mean, he would skate right through you. He would go right for that net. That was his main purpose.
He wasn't satisfied until the red light went on. And the glare of the light, I guess, matched some of the glare in his eyes.
It was like a train coming at you at night, but it had, instead of one headlight, there were two.
And it was just amazing intensity blazing out of him, that if he looked hard at anything, like something out of Stephen King, it would have caught fire.
Maurice Richard had those moments, those nights, those games where he just took command, you know, with his force of will.
Early in his career with the Canadiens, it was clear Richard had a passionate desire to play that separated him from the crowd.
My dad was the first coach he had in the NHL. He came into the league in 42, 43. He got an early indication of the intensity of Maurice Richard. He came into the dressing room one night before a game, and my father said, "You're not playing tonight." And this young Maurice Richard slammed the door in my father's face and went home. Well, there was just a hush in the dressing room because kids didn't do this to a crusty old coach. And instead of being upset, my father turned to the players who were sitting there and said, "That's the kind of a player I want on my team."
Of course, Canadiens coach Dick Irvin was right, and Richard quickly became a team leader and one of the NHL's brightest stars, especially in 1945, when the Rocket established a new scoring standard, becoming the first player in league history to score 50 goals in 50 games. Even as Richard was setting individual records, his team always came first. He'd do anything to help his beloved Canadiens win. That iron intensity was most evident in Game 7 of the 1952 Stanley Cup semifinals against the Boston Bruins.
He was blindsided by a pretty tough player named Leo Levine. He was flattened. He looked like he was dead.
So badly knocked around and concussed that they thought, well, he'll be through for the night.
And with about 3 minutes to go in the game, suddenly who appears on the Montreal bench walking out from the dressing room? Here's Maurice Richard.
With blood dripping from his face, and scored on the Boston goalie, and I don't think there's been a cheer heard like that in Montreal since.
The Canadiens lost to the Detroit Red Wings in the 1955 Stanley Cup Finals. But between 1956 and 1960, the team made its mark. Led by Richard, Montreal won a record 5 consecutive Stanley Cups. And all the while, the Rocket continued to score goals. He might have been getting older, but the fire within continued to burn bright as Richard set a scoring mark for generations to shoot at.
Early in the 1957-58 campaign, one of the world's finest athletes scores his 500th goal. The Rocket is undoubtedly a superstar.
His talent and desire, he set himself apart and just accomplished more in the playoffs, in the tough games, than anybody else, and that's why he's a Hall of Famer first and foremost.
Unfortunately, the same intense desire that drove the Rocket to become a scoring machine could also get him in trouble.
1955, Rocket Richard playing against the Boston Bruins. Hal Lako, his stick happened to cut Richard. Richard just wiped his hand across his head and saw the blood and went absolutely berserk and went after Hal Lako.
The linesman, Cliff Thompson, was a former Bruin. And the feeling was that while Thompson was holding the Rocket off, he wasn't holding off Hal Lako. So the Rocket did what was natural. Popped Cliff Thompson one.
Even in the outlaw days of the National Hockey League, the rambunctious Richard had gone too far. League President Clarence Campbell felt he had no choice but to suspend Richard for the remaining 3 games of the 1955 season, and then, incredibly, the playoffs.
It was a product of temper, but at the same time, it was an attack on the authority of the game and couldn't be dealt with in any other manner.
For Clarence Campbell to do what he did, which was to suspend Mr. Hockey, Maurice Richard, from the rest of the playoffs, to banish him from hockey, was an unbelievable act of courage.
He was trying to prove that he was the boss. He didn't take into account the many mitigating factors.
But because of those factors, Campbell's courage would ultimately turn to folly and have unexpected consequences, both at home in Montreal and far beyond. In the spring of 1955, as Maurice Richard neared the end of his 13th NHL season with the Montreal Canadiens, he was suspended for striking a referee. But in suspending the Rocket, League President Clarence Campbell had severely miscalculated the reaction of the Montreal fans.
En 24 heures, le président Campbell était devenu une tête de turc et Richard une victime.
Campbell, however, would not back down and boldly attended the first game of Richard's suspension.
They pelted him with tomatoes. He had to hold his hand to his head to protect himself.
Campbell reçut d'abord une volée de coups et les policiers de faction ne réussirent pas à parer pour lui.
A tear gas bomb was let off. They had to close off the forum and evacuate the building. And then the vandals took over. They paraded around the building, throwing rocks and bricks. They went down St. Catherine Street, vandalizing cars, raiding hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage.
Richard's role in the 1955 hockey riots of Montreal, however large, didn't diminish his legend. And when the Rocket came up to the Hall of Fame in 1961, his worthiness was never in doubt.
The Rocket had to stand his ground, and stand his ground he did. Now, on the other side, Clarence Campbell, the president, he had to run the business, and run the business he did, and he did it in his hometown. That wasn't a black eye. It really signified how well both did their job.
Although controversy followed Richard, his accomplishments far outweighed his indiscretions. 544 career goals, 8 Stanley Cup championships, and a bond never to be broken between the spirited Richard and his Montreal fans that loved his intensity like no other.
Maurice Rocket Richard.
Like nearly all his fellow Hall of Famers, Maurice Richard was from Canada. And despite hockey's global growth in the 1970s and 80s, the Hockey Hall of Fame remained strictly North American, until the induction of its first international player in 1989. Incredibly, that player came from a country considered hostile to North America and never played a single NHL game.
From 1969 to 1985, the name Vladislav Tretiak was synonymous with Russian hockey, the most recognizable player on the best team in the world. A goalie on Moscow's Red Army team, Tretiak's unorthodox style would ultimately change the way the position was played and win the recognition of the Hockey Hall of Fame.
I was very instrumental in putting his name up when I was a member of the selection committee. No matter where they play or who they played for, it's really up to the selection committee. And there's no politics in the selection committee. You speak your piece, and you listen, you debate, and Tretiak was able to get 75% of the vote. That opened up our horizons worldly.
There's something culturally that Russian people, they're attracted to hockey, much like Canada. I don't know if it's the ruggedness, the cold climate, or whatever, but Russian people took to hockey.
I started playing hockey, I was 11 years old. I started in the best hockey school, Red Army team. I was 17 years old, and the head coach said, I would like you to play for us. Oh, for me, 17 years old, play Red Army team, the big surprise for me.
The Red Army team of Moscow was comprised of the best players in the Soviet Union, part of a national sports system that was unlike any in North America or Western Europe. The individual meant nothing in the Soviet Union. What meant everything was the success of the team.
Leader Brezhnev watched the hockey every game. Communist Party push us only win gold medal. If Soviet Union hockey teams win silver medal, it's very bad. We have free practice every day. 7 o'clock wake up, 1 hour run, special practice after lunch, sleep 2 hours, and 5 to 7 one more. My life very tough because my wife, you don't see sometimes 2 weeks, 3 weeks. My son, he look at the pictures, this is my father. Pictures in the wall because he don't see me too much.
While Tretiak was forced to sacrifice his family life, his hockey life flourished. 5 times he was the Soviet League's most valuable player, and by the mid-1970s, he had become the premier sports icon in a country obsessed with dominating the West.
If you've been to Russia, Vlad is close to Michael Jordan status. He truly is a national hero there.
Outside of Russia, the talented Tretiak was hardly known at all. Then, in 1972, he brought his revolutionary style of goaltending to a superpower showdown against a team of NHL All-Stars.
First time any of us in Canada heard about Tretiak was in 1972 when the Russians came over to play Team Canada.
The Summit Series was not supposed to be monumental. It was supposed to be a cakewalk.
I really felt that we would overwhelm him. When he saw Mahavlich and Cornway and Esposito come on, he'd wonder why he ever played the game.
Before a game, I sometimes shake a little bit because, my God, I play against now this best team in the war.
The series proved to be Tretiak's global coming out party. For 8 games, he frustrated North America's best.
He did become a tough puzzle to try to solve. He really did. He was good. He was one of these guys that had a new style that we hadn't seen much of in North America.
He was like a huge spider. He had big, long arms, long legs, and then you say, how can you ever get a puck past this guy? He was the best goaltender I've ever seen.
Team Canada would ultimately win the series, but it would be Tretiak's unmistakable talent and innovative style that stood out, even among the greatest players in the world. 3 years later, Tretiak was back in Canada.
Number 20, Vladislav Tretiak.
It was New Year's Eve 1975 at the Montreal Forum. The acrobatic goalie from the Soviet Union was so amazing. This time, he even had Canadian fans on his side.
The Canadians should have won that game by 8 goals. They so badly outplayed them in the first period. It was incredible.
Now Lapointe keeps it in, takes the shot right off, and Tretiak is incredible.
Montreal outshot them terribly. It should have been 12-0.
And it was Tretiak that kept them in the game.
And that established his image more than any other game that he ever played.
The first star, Vladislav Tretiak.
That night, I think that's the game that put him in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
There would be more memorable games to come for Tretiak, like leading the Soviet Union to Olympic gold in 1976. But 4 years later, in 1980, in the prime of his career, Tretiak would play in a game he would like to forget. A game that nearly shattered his Hall of Fame dreams. Goalie who came out of Soviet bloc obscurity in 1972 was by the end of the decade among the most recognizable hockey names in the world. But there would be some rough times ahead.
Tretiak's remembered a lot for the Summit Series. He's remembered a lot for what he did on that New Year's Eve in Montreal. But not many people seem to remember what happened in the 1980 Olympics.
The Soviet Union was the overwhelming favorite to win Olympic gold. Then in the semifinals against a young and fearless team from the United States, Tretiak gave up 2 first-period goals.
Long shot, easy save by Tretiak, but Johnson is there and scores with 1 second to play.
Coach said, Vladislav Tretiak, bad goal, last goal, he don't play no more.
There's Tretiak on the bench.
took place for him.
For me, big surprise. I have shock. I have shock. Why?
Why Tikhonov ever took out Tretiak from that game is one of the great mysteries.
Victor Tikhonov's a great coach, but every coach makes a mistake, and in hindsight, that was probably a mistake pulling Vlad.
If you're a United States player and you know that you're playing against a legend, and you come out for the next period and you see, they pulled Tretiak. Boys, we got him, we got him.
Without Tretiak, the impossible happened. The U.S. got him all right, winning 4-3 on its way to Olympic gold. It was the low point in Tretiak's brilliant career.
After the game, I go home. I think maybe I stop, I retired.
It was a difficult moment, and he had to find a way of dealing with it and returning to his previous form.
I think, okay, I not stop. I would like show everybody I best goal in the world. I play well, I win the cup, I win world championship, I win the Olympic game in 1984, I have gold medal, I retired. I show everybody who is who.
That was Tretiak's third Olympic gold medal and 10th world championship. Even for a player who never stepped on the ice in an NHL game, by 1989, those numbers were too remarkable for the Hockey Hall of Fame to ignore.
They call me, Vladislav, you're Hockey Hall of Fame. Oh my God. For me, it's a big surprise, very excited.
He was the first hockey player that never played in North America that was put into the Hockey Hall of Fame as an honored member.
I think it's a great tribute to the Hockey Hall of Fame that they recognize hockey talent wherever in the world it's played.
It's not a National Hockey League Hockey Hall of Fame. It is the Hockey Hall of Fame.
From behind the Iron Curtain to the Hockey Hall of Fame, the great Vladislav Tretiak paved the way for worldwide recognition of the sport that has talent around the world.
No matter where a player learned the game, he had to start with a pair of skates, a stick, and a puck. But equipment has changed over the years, and those innovations have allowed hockey to evolve into the faster, more precise game we know today. But innovations are not limited to equipment. The game itself evolves, and those who affect the most change wind up in the Hall of Fame. They are hockey's pioneers, like Bobby Orr, the legendary Boston Bruin defenseman who changed the way his position was played.
Throughout his 10 seasons with the Boston Bruins in the late 1960s and early 70s, Bobby Orr, the prodigy from Parry Sound, Ontario, was a true hockey revolutionary. He was the first defensive player in the history of the game to focus on offense.
Here's Bobby Orr going in, backhander.
Orr broke the mold of the typical hockey defenseman by inventing a new and electrifying style that forever changed the way the game was played.
Bobby Orr reinvented the position of defense. Before Bobby Orr, defensemen rarely lugged the puck anywhere.
He's over the line.
When Orr got the puck, he brought it out himself.
Behind the net.
From the defense position, Bobby had the ability to manipulate the game, but he did it in such a fun, exciting, determined, talented way.
I played a style that wasn't a style that many players played. Coaches didn't like it. Teams didn't like it. If they'd asked me to sit back and not skate with the puck, I don't think I would have been nearly as effective.
Orr's flashy offensive style turned hockey upside down. He was the first defenseman to win the league's scoring title, a remarkable achievement he accomplished twice. He was always attacking, never retreating.
It looks like a stampede coming at you.
Bobby Orr, one of the game's great skaters. Look at him fly.
And you start to feel yourself backpedaling, and backpedaling more furiously.
Picks up speed.
You breathe more quickly.
Here he comes.
And then, who knows what was going to happen out of all of that, but you knew something was.
Orr holds, spins away from McGregor to Busick, and he scores!
Before Orr's arrival in 1966, Boston had spent many seasons in the league's basement. The Bruins, in fact, had last won the Stanley Cup in 1941, and by the 60s, their fans were clamoring for something to happen. And that something was Orr, at the time a 14-year-old hockey prodigy, playing for Boston's top minor league club.
Bobby Orr was indentured when he was 12 years old, and people had gotten word that the Messiah was coming. scouts, writers, people whispered, there's a Messiah coming.
So that's all they had to talk about, is when is the kid coming? When is the kid coming? And thank God when he finally showed up, he was great.
When the kid finally did arrive, he won the Calder Trophy as the league's best rookie. And then, in his second season, Orr and the Bruins came together as a team and made the playoffs for the first time since 1958.
He turned the losing team primarily by himself into a winning team.
He scores for a goal!
2 seasons after that, Boston swept past the Chicago Blackhawks in the 1970 Stanley Cup semifinals.
The Bruins move into the Stanley Cup Finals.
Now all that stood between Orr's Bruins and the Stanley Cup were the St. Louis Blues, an expansion team playing in its 3rd year in the league. The heavily favored Bruins won the first 3 games of the best-of-7 series and returned to Boston for Game 4. The stage was set, but would the Messiah deliver?
We go out thinking Stanley Cup, and St. Louis is not quitting. St. Louis is not rolling over.
With the game tied at 3, the teams headed into overtime, with Orr hoping to head into hockey history.
We obviously wanted to finish it there at home in front of our fans. It had been 29 years since they had seen the Stanley Cup, so they were very excited.
Westfall rolled it in front. Sanderson tried a shot that was wide.
The puck was coming up, and I went in to try to keep it in, and it hit me, and I knocked it back in the corner.
Bobby kept it in, and then he just headed for the net, and Derek just timed it perfectly.
Bobby Orr behind the net to Sanderson. Orr! Bobby Orr scores, and the Boston Bruins have won the Stanley Cup.
It was just so dramatic in terms of flying through the air.
Bobby went flying through the air like he was Superman, and I think he felt like Superman at that point.
It was something I'd dreamt about so much as a kid, and now I'm part of the best team in the world. It was wonderful.
There they go, the Boston Bruins skating off with the Stanley Cup.
You ask anyone over the age of 40 in New England where they were when Bobby Orr scored the goal, and they'll tell you.
You could hear everybody screaming on the block, but everybody stayed inside to watch the post-game interviews.
The Stanley Cup with Bobby Orr. That's what it's all about.
And then we went out in the streets and played hockey and tried to recreate the goal.
There were many imitators, but nothing would ever come close to the original. A lasting image kept for all time, with one click of the shutter.
Picture really made the goal and made it bigger than it probably would have been, because it's one of the great sports pictures of all time.
At the time he scored the goal to win the 1970 Stanley Cup, Bobby Orr was only 22. Little did he and the rest of us know there were dark days to come.
It's rare when a young athlete delivers on his promise and potential, but that's what Bobby Orr did when he led his Boston Bruins to the 1970 Stanley Cup.
1970 was the culmination. They won again in 1972, beating the Rangers in the 6th game.
Orr's all-out, innovative style of play had brought Boston 2 cups, but it had also begun to take its toll on Bobby's knees, which began to fail him at an early age.
When you're carrying the puck as a defenseman and making the moves he made, he gets hit in the knee an awful lot.
3 years after winning his 2nd cup, a damaged and broken Orr left Boston and tried to revive his game with the Chicago Blackhawks.
We saw his greatness for such a short period of time. And it's sort of one of the tragedies of hockey. The fact of the matter is, many of those years, we only saw a shadow of what Bobby Orr was.
Finally, in 1978, no longer able to play to his accustomed high level on his injury-ravaged knees, Orr left the game almost as quickly as he came to it. He was just 30 years old.
It was very clear in my mind that there's just no way I could play anymore. To all of a sudden come to anybody that's played a sport and loved the sport to say, hey, you can't do it any longer, it's tough.
Like it had done just 7 times before, the Hockey Hall of Fame waived its customary 3-year waiting period and inducted Orr immediately after his retirement. It wasn't much of a stretch.
Seeing who had been waived previously, there was no way until somebody changed the rule on me that Bobby Orr would have to wait 3 years. He was that outstanding.
The Hall of Fame, it's quite a place, and the players that I'm there with, it's wonderful.
Bobby Orr was a 3-time most valuable player, and 8 times he was named the league's best defenseman. His career lasted slightly more than 10 seasons, but in that one decade, his style of play changed the game more than it had changed in the previous 50 years.
During his 10-year run, Bobby Orr was definitely hockey's best player, but he wasn't the game's most identifiable player. That honor went to Bobby Hull, a 1983 inductee, who might have impacted the game more than any other player. As hockey came of age during the television era of the 1960s, Hull was in the right place at the right time. He had the looks of an actor and a swagger to match. He was the game's first superstar.
He was a farm boy from Western Canada, a hayseed really, blessed with amazing talent and skill. Bobby Hull was hockey's Mickey Mantle, a star among stars.
Bobby Hull was one of those players that changed the game. He was, without a doubt, the most flamboyant, the most well-known, the most recognizable player in the NHL.
They don't make them like that anymore from the standpoint of the entertainment and the color that he provided the hockey fans. And he matched that dash and that flash with terrific hockey skills.
Bobby Hull began his career with the Chicago Blackhawks in 1957. And right from the start, his blazing speed and dynamic flair were hard to overlook.
Bobby was dynamite and had so much color that no wonder they called him the Golden Jet.
Here comes the Golden Jet, Bobby Hull.
The blonde hair and golden boy of hockey. He was probably more exciting than any other player in the history of hockey, including everybody.
Back to Bobby Hull. The drive, the score!
He could just fly. People were mesmerized by his speed.
People were also mesmerized by Hull's powerful physique.
Here was this guy who was just huge. I mean, he was just rippled. And this was a time before people went to gyms.
I remember as a kid, I had this picture of him in McLean's magazine, and it's got a shot of him bailing Heath, and he's jacked. He looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? And I'm kind of like, whoa, is that the National Hockey League? They're built like that?
Hull's speed and strength translated into pure power. He didn't invent the slap shot, but he sure did perfect it. He also helped develop the curved hockey stick, which gave his shot more velocity and caused the puck to move erratically.
The game in the late 50s in the old 6-team league was a 2-1, 1-0 game. Defensive, boring. Bobby, with his shot and that curve stick, was able to move scoring outside the blue line.
Oh, it was a frightening thought to stand there and have him blast this thing. I mean, it was frightening. It wasn't fun.
To a goalie, Bobby Hull was that mythical figure that could shoot a puck 1,000,000 miles an hour. It wasn't a literal number of 100 miles an hour. It was 1,000,000 miles an hour.
We're playing in Chicago one day, and Walter Kachuk lost the draw and went back to Bobby Hull, and he just cranked it, and it went right by my ear. And I think my eyes were like this big, because I never saw anything go that fast. And I went over to Walter, and before they dropped the puck again, I says, if you lose another face-off like that, I'm going to hit you over the head with my stick, because I don't want that guy shooting the puck.
Unfortunately for his opponents, Hull liked to shoot the puck. He liked to shoot it often, and he liked to shoot it hard. He won scoring titles in 1960, 62, and 1966. That year, he also became the first player in the history of the game to score more than 50 goals in a season, a mark he reached 5 times in the NHL.
There's a new hero on the international sports scene, Bobby Hull. The hockey ace of the Chicago Blackhawks suddenly finds himself besieged by autograph seekers.
He was a star, the first of the superstars.
He really had a lot to do with bringing the NHL uptown at the time.
Bobby Hull was Hollywood.
Fans used to come down before the game and lean over the glass, and the guys would sign. Most of them wouldn't, but Bobby Hull would stand there. His coach would get mad at him. Hey, you're supposed to be warming up, not stand there signing autographs. He was the most popular player of his time.
He had a charisma that enabled the NHL to expand. I mean, it was Bobby Hull that inspired the NHL to go from 6 to 12 teams in 1967.
Around the same time, recognizing Hull's charisma, CBS decided to televise NHL games on a national basis. The league was cashing in on Bobby Hull. But in 1972, when Bobby Hull tried to cash in on himself, the Blackhawks deflected his move.
The NHL owners were not interested in paying the players their rightful share of the pot.
And they thought they controlled the players through the players' contracts, almost like the players were indentured.
And when he asked for $150,000 a year, they laughed at him. And then along came the WHA.
The WHA was the World Hockey Association, an upstart league that really wasn't taken as a serious rival to the NHL until they went after Hull in 1972.
I said, if you guys come up with $1 million up front, then I'll go.
They brought Bobby to Winnipeg, gave him the $1 million signing bonus and the big salary.
That gave the World Hockey Association a serious amount of credibility.
I can only hope that with my signing here with Winnipeg that there will be a number of other individuals want to play in the WHA also.
Once he inked that contract with the Winnipeg Jets, and it sort of was, hey, this is okay. We're going to try it. Maybe we'll create more big league jobs for players.
In its first season, a total of 68 NHL players jumped to the WHA, including other big-name stars like Gordie Howe and Derek Sanderson. Thanks to Hull, the players now had some contractual leverage. The NHL's monopoly was gone, and Hull's impact on the salary structure of hockey was stamped forever.
What Bobby did is he just really opened up the bankrolls of the owners to all of the players in sports. Every time one of these guys signs another $9 million contract, he should bow down and say thank you very much to Bobby Hull.
That profound effect he had in the game, changing the economic face of hockey. Bill Wirtz, the owner of the Blackhawks, had told Bobby's brother Dennis that your stinking brother cost the NHL $1 billion. And Bobby said, my accountant got out his calculator and added it up and said, no, it's more than that.
Hull played in each of the WHA's 7 seasons and scored more than 400 goals. Although the league would fold in 1979, a victim of overspending and diminishing funds, it made its mark on the sport.
We've known right along that it was coming to an end.
4 teams went into the NHL, so it was mission accomplished. The WHA was a huge success for players.
Because one of those teams was Hull's Winnipeg Jets, Bobby briefly returned to the NHL before retiring in 1980. 3 years later, he was in the Hall of Fame, which refused to accept his WHA statistics, but couldn't ignore his impact on and off the ice.
Bobby was a Hall of Famer and going to be an honored member, WHA or no WHA.
As hockey's first superstar, Bobby Hull helped take the NHL to new heights. He then played a role in establishing another viable professional league, which brought hockey salaries in line with other sports. Added up, and Bobby Hull may have been the most influential person in hockey history.
At the Hockey Hall of Fame, the game's immortals are remembered in historical exhibits and magnificent photos. There are mementos of the game's heritage and souvenirs from its memorable moments. But what really makes the Hockey Hall of Fame come alive are the men who played the game. They are the essence of a great and glorious sport. It's their spirit that lives on in Toronto and in their stories from the Hall of Fame.
Wake Island was one of the